And he even mentioned that the antidote to Belladonna took 2 weeks to fully work. Lemmy said it was a weird time while he was waiting for the antidote to work. He'd be at home reading a book and look down and realize that there was no book and that he wasn't even at home. Hello, and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints. This is the show where lifelong friends, musicians, and chatty Cathys of the highest order get together to research and tell the story behind some of the most influential albums ever made, as chronicled in Robert Dimery's book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. We're going to go deep on this record today. We're going to tell the backstory. We're going to play clips. We're going to dissect a few key songs. And above all, we're going to tell you what's working and what's not and why. And at the end of all that, we are going to vote on whether you really needed to hear this record before you died. Now listen, folks. We're all lifelong musicians here, as I mentioned, and before that, and even more importantly than that, we're fans of music. So we do have respect. We get how amazingly challenging it is to create something that people want to listen to, let alone something that endures all these years. But we started the show to let you hear how bandmates talk after the gig on the long ride to the next town with the radio on. And I'll tell you that no matter what's playing, we like to opine. We like to laugh about. We like to complain about every nuance, every nook and cranny of the music, even the stuff we really love. So fair warning, we are not super fans, and we shall not be treating this album or band with any particular reverence in our quest to determine if this is really an essential listen. Now, my name is Rob. I'm your host for the evening, and I've spent countless hours playing, writing, recording music in poorly lit bars with 6-inch stages and windowless rooms filled with dude smell. And I think that makes me rather qualified to tell tonight's story.
Oh, yeah.
The main character of which has been described as a radioactive cowboy, Black Bart meets Mad Max, or simply a reptile. I am, of course, referring to Lemmy Kilmister, frontman and beating heart of the band Motorhead, and their seminal 1980 album, Ace of Spades. Now, before we get to the introductions of our panel tonight and into our backstory and thoughts, let's play a clip of the title track to get everyone situated. It's called Ace of Spades. Okay, with that out of the way, we're all on the same wavelength now. We're going to introduce our panel by way of a mean tweet-length review of the album, and I'm going to throw things first over to Marty.
Hey, this might not be so mean, but here we go. This album is the soundtrack for a high-security prison break sponsored by Harley Davidson. These manly crusaders will slap you in the face with an open hand like the little bitch you are while they steal your woman, leaving you alone, piss-soaked, and crying.
That's good. I love it. I love it. Let's kick it next to Adam.
Oh, Marty, that was fantastic. Hey, everybody, this is Adam, and I did have a earlier tweet that I threw out that was about every villain from an A-Team movie, or an A-Team episode, but get your emails ready, folks, because I might be pissing off some folks this week. And I'm also a little scared that Lemmy may somehow sneak up behind me and beat me to death with a mic stand. So here we go. Motorhead, uninspired riffs, sleazebag lyrics, They're like Kiss if the costume truck never showed up and Gene Simmons accidentally set his throat on fire.
You're lucky he's no longer with us.
I know. I'm even a little scared of his ghost at this point.
Excellent. Sounds like it might be a contentious one. Excited to get into it. Again, this is Rob here, your humble host, and my tweet length review for Ace of Spades is, it's like AC/DC without all the subtlety. It's music to crush beer cans against your forehead to. This is the rock and roll cavemen would make if they had electric guitars.
I mean, everything that was said was accurate. Those weren't mean tweets. Those were realistic and honest tweets.
I don't think this is in any of our wheelhouses per se, although I think we've probably all been aware of Lemmy and Motorhead. We're going to get into the backstory in a little bit, but let's go deeper on those general impressions. Marty, why don't we kick it off with you? What did you think about this record? Where are you coming from?
I listen to this music like in a room by myself without telling anyone I'm listening to it because it's very intimidating. I feel like I'm too like a weak, like I'm not tough or strong or have lived a hard enough life to openly admit that I've listened to this album. But you know what? It kind of got me. It's hard hitting. It's drug fueled. It's exactly like you said, crushing beers and women and, breaking the law. And it's got all that. It's powerful. It's great trio music. It's hard, and it's got a really funny album cover.
They make a lot of noise for a trio. Let me tell you something.
I will agree with that, definitely. We've been called rockists before on the show, which is kind of a nickname that I'll proudly wear. But this was a rough week for me. You guys know that, and I haven't brought up vocal tones and timbres and off-key and all that stuff in probably 100 episodes. I think I'm going to pat myself on the back for not harping on that. But this was a hard week 2 times through, and I was just exhausted from listening to this. His voice is so grating. You're right, they are a powerful trio. I may have liked these as just instrumental rock jams, but man, his non-stop, that growl, that scream is just so grating on me that I found this week was actually pretty hard.
Get that man some throat coat.
Seriously. Ooh. Yeah, Adam, go smoke 600 cigarettes in a row and then let's see what you sound like.
Yeah, I did read that Lemmy has been smoking 2 packs a day since he was 11 years old. He lived to like 70. So. But look, I'm more in line with Marty here. This is the first time that I had ever put on a Motorhead record, and it rocks. It has a lot of energy. It's fun. It is dumbed down smash rock, but I am cool with that. I actually have a place in my heart for that. My main complaint is what Adam is alluding to, which is Lemmy cannot really sing. And it doesn't bother me for a few songs, but I think by the end of a 40-minute album, I am getting fatigued with their lack of variety, and particularly the lack of variety in singing. I mean, he makes me tired just listening to him sing.
Yeah.
There are moments when he tries to have some sort of tone, and it's like cute. You're like, oh, that's real sweet. He's trying to hit a note.
He's trying. I also thought that, because I've heard Ace of Spades, right? And it's a pretty cool riff. Like, all right, great. I found that the rest of the album didn't, the riffs, because it is guitar rock, it is riff-driven music, but the riffs just are not that catchy. They're not very compelling. They kind of feel like something that you'd stumble on in the Guitar Center playing and be like, oh, this could be a song, but it's not really a good song. It's just some stupid riff that you came up with. But they took those stupid riffs and then ran with them for 9 other songs. That's my take.
I think the riffs are just fine. They are not complex. So it kind of depends on what you're comparing it to, right?
Sure.
This is proto thrash metal and it's proto hardcore punk, as we're going to sort of learn about in the backstory. And I do think they deserve some recognition as progenitors of a certain style of sped up, intense music. In the end, am I going to tell you that I prefer Judas Priest or other bands that have some of these other areas kind of fleshed out a little better? I mean, yeah. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that Motorhead they're lifted up into the pantheon in large part because of the personality and persona of their frontman. And let's just talk right off the bat about something Lemmy did totally correctly, I think kind of by accident, which is he always dresses the exact same. Like, he is a fashion icon. He's pretty much dressed that way since the mid-'70s.
He has a uniform.
He has a uniform.
That is absolutely correct.
The outlaw look.
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally. Biker cowboy, something like that. And it goes way back. And also the mutton chops connected to the mustache. That look, he's had that look, I think, since he was even playing in bands. And we're going to hear about his long history in bands. So clearly they've done something correct. But as we're going to learn, they've never had tons and tons of commercial success. Lemmy did not die a rich man, as he was pretty quick to mention in interviews. But I think they kicked off a lot. I think they inspired a lot of people. I think it's one of those bands we have to see it in that context.
Sure. It was from a while back. It was a Behind the Music, and it was a who's who of 90s music. And Lemmy was still alive. It was not like, hey, he's dead, let's all praise him. This was folks in their heyday praising Motorhead and Lars and Dave Grohl, and all these guys were just enthralled with him, his personality, his music, and how he basically started or helped them further their own careers.
I also saw a clip montage of him talking shit about many 90s bands.
Now, I missed that. All right, now I'm going to go back and watch that.
I'm very excited to tell you about Lemmy's life, personality, and various things he has said and done over the years, because it is rich territory to mine, let me tell you. So I was excited to get a hold of this one. So with that in mind, let's get into a little bit of the background of Lemmy and Motorhead. So this week in preparation, I read Lemmy's autobiography entitled White Line Fever.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God.
So I'll be referencing that quite a bit. I also watched some of those documentaries you mentioned. I think it's called Classic Albums, about the album, and some stuff about Lemmy. There's a lot of material online. I should mention that it was made kind of apparent to me that even this autobiography, which I will be quoting from liberally as fact, might not be factual all the time, but okay. But we'll take it with a grain of salt. That's okay.
Good disclaimer. All right.
Good disclaimer. So let's start with this auspicious man's birth. He was born Ian Fraser Kilmister, which is an awesome name, just right off the bat.
I was going to say, that's a real last name. That's not some stage name. Kilmister. Oh, man.
That's a real last name. He's born on Christmas Eve in 1945 in a place.
Get out. Even better.
In a place called Stoke-on-Trent. It's the Midlands of the UK, about an hour south of Manchester. So significantly distant from London, different culture, etc. And his father, get this, is a deacon in the Royal Air Force, and his mother is a librarian.
Oh, God.
Let that sink in for a second.
A deacon.
That is mild-mannered with a capital M.
Yeah.
But okay, his dad left early in his life. Lemmy didn't see him again until he was like 25, so perhaps that's where he gets the rambling gene.
Yeah, there we go. That's it.
The rambling gene from the priest? Or from the, what was it?
It's the deacon.
From the deacon? Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, deacon had to ramble. Now, when he's about 10, his mother gets remarried. They move over to northern Wales, and it's kind of like the northern tip of Wales that's sticking out. So not super far from where they were before, but it's Wales. It's a different country. It's a different culture. He's the only English kid at school, in a Welsh school, so he gets picked on a lot. I assume that's where he develops some of his boy named Sue toughness. And this town in Wales is kind of like a seaside resort that gets a lot of tourists, right? In the summer in particular. And so despite living in kind of a small town, he gets a fair amount of early exposure to this young phenomenon called rock and roll. Keep in mind, he's born in 45. By the time he's a teenager, rock and roll is just starting to kick off. And the very first musician he falls in love with pretty much bases his career on. Any guesses?
Ah, man.
Buddy Holly.
Buddy Holly. Okay, I was going to say Elvis, but I guess that would have been.
Buddy Holly, the uber nerd, is what gets him to start playing guitar as a teen.
Really? Okay.
This is from Lemmy himself. He says, when I saw Buddy Holly play in 1958, I was, of course, there looking for girls. At that age, all you want to do is get laid. And I thought, that's the fucking job for me. I took a guitar to school. I was immediately surrounded by women. I couldn't play it. And with all due respect, you do have to learn a couple chords eventually, but not too many, though. That can ruin you.
So wait, he's out looking for tail at 13, by the way. You said he was born in 45 and he sees Buddy Holly in 58?
I think in post-war Wales, you grow up fast.
It's a different time. Yeah, I started smoking at 10, drinking at 11.
You need to start repopulating Europe ASAP. All right, that's a good point.
So he knows from an early age that some of the bands he's in, in high school around 16, 17, that the Welsh bands aren't really going anywhere. People aren't committed where he's based. He's really trying for something. He has this vision in his head of some kind of stardom or the ability to get girls, basically. So the whole time he's been sneaking over to nearby Manchester and Liverpool, which are close together relatively, to see shows for a few years, sneaking in, right? And around the age of 18, he ends up deciding to move to Manchester. Now, as a side note, read this book. Lemmy is kind of the Forrest Gump of rock history. He seems to be around in the background shots of a lot of important moments. And
I remember one that, you'll hit on it, but it came from a prior episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for instance, he is a huge Beatles fan, and he saw them multiple times at the Cavern Club in Liverpool in the early 60s.
Wow.
And when he speaks of the Beatles, I just thought this was interesting. Like, you have this vision of what this guy's going to be like. And he is that. He's that in some ways. But other times he would subvert my expectations. So when he speaks of the Beatles, he's gushing. It's startling. But he's just like, I lived it. You don't understand what it was like. There will never be another band like the Beatles. And I think one of the reasons for that is that he loves them because they were effectively local boys to him. But one of the interesting things I drew from it that I don't feel like I have read very much about is that he talks about how there's still this image of the Beatles as clean-cut nice boys. And he clarifies that Brian Epstein, their manager, is the one that cleaned them up for public image purposes, but that Liverpool was in fact a rough seafaring town, in his words. And that Ringo in particular, he mentions, was from a neighborhood called the Dingle in Liverpool, which he equates to growing up in the Bronx in the 70s. And so by contrast, he's like, the Rolling Stones were Nancy boys. They were mama's boys compared to the Beatles. They had the bad boy image. The Beatles were the rough and tumble guys because Liverpool was the rough and tumble place.
Right.
And he tells a story about a show he was at. He says they were playing at the Cavern, and someone in the audience called John gay. And he said he stopped the set, put down his guitar, went out in the crowd, found the guy, gave him the Liverpool kiss, and bloodied up his nose, and then jumped back on stage to finish the show.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I had read a little bit about that. He said that the Rolling Stones were like upper class, well-to-do parents, and that they were terrible live.
Oh, interesting. Well,
Yeah.
Certainly they were art school kids, so they came from more money than probably that seems like the Beatles did. But I just thought that was an interesting aside that, he loves the Beatles. He was very much inspired by them and that phenomenon, especially coming out of what he thinks of as maybe his hometown.
Sure.
Or close to it. So, okay, back to Lemmy and his attempts to get musical things started in Manchester now, right? This is an era when no one owned any equipment at all. So being the bass player was as simple as owning a bass guitar, which I should point out at this point, Lemmy did not do. He's the guitar player. But by 1965, he's 20. He's playing in bands around Manchester. Nothing's really sticking. Turnover is high. One night he goes to see a band called the Rocking Vicars at a club. Their stage act is that they are dressed like Finnish native people. The Sami people from the Laplands. That's their shtick, is like wearing reindeer boots and Laplander gear.
Okay.
Even though they're British. And he thinks they rock, and he just immediately asks around about how he can join the band. And he auditions and he gets the gig. So he tells this story to illustrate both the times and the type of people that were in a band, like the Rockin' Vicars. His bandmate, he had a Mini Cooper that he loved. And at the time, wire wheels, which were hubcaps with all the spokes sticking out, like a cool version of a hubcap. They were really expensive. They were really tough to come by. So one day, this bandmate of his, Ken's, driving along, and a second Mini Cooper blows past him on the road, one that has the cool hubcaps. And then a little farther up the road at the next roundabout, he sees the car flipped upside down, wrecked, the dude hanging out, bloody and unconscious. So what does this dude do? He takes the hubcaps. He gets the hell out of there. He hides him in a haystack because apparently it's a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Oh, wow.
And then he phones the cops and goes back to wait for them to get this guy some medical attention.
Jeez.
Hey, at least he called the cops eventually.
That was nice of him. Yeah.
Times is tough. That was the other guy in the band, in the Vicars?
That was the other guy in the Rocking Vicars. Yes.
Okay. Wow. All right. So he's keeping some interesting company.
So Lemmy's in this band for a bit. Yeah, they're touring around. They're having some amount of success. They record some singles. They actually have a minor hit with a cover of a Kinks song called Dandy. which just because it's the first example I could find of Lemmy on a recording. He's playing guitar on this recording, not singing, I should point out. But it sounds so different than Motorhead. Let's just give that a quick listen.
Dandy, dandy, where you gonna go now? Who you gonna run to? All your little life, you're chasing all the girls. They can't resist your smile. Oh, they long for a dandy, dandy, chatting up the ladies, tickling the fancy, pouring out your charms to meet your own demand.
Now, of course, this is a full 15 years before Ace of Spades, the album that we're going to get into today. This is 1965. This album we're talking about today came out in 1980. But one through line here is I kept being impressed by the length and breadth of Lemmy's musical career. He really has weaved his way through a lot of times and things in a really interesting way. And so that's one of the ways he's classic.
Yeah, when you sent across this song, I didn't bother looking it up to see who was involved, but I assumed maybe he kicked the crap out of all the guys in this band and not actually be in the band. So
Right.
that's
He
pretty
just
wild.
beat them all up.
Okay, but so this single leads to them touring the UK a bunch, and in some places he says having women come tear their clothes off while they're playing, and women would run into the club with scissors trying to get a lock of their hair.
Jeez.
Listen, this could be nonsense, but
Sure.
he claims again and again, there was occasionally and briefly an element of Beatlemania just to being in a rock band, any rock band at that time.
Got it. People were looking for another excuse to freak out, and the guys in the bands were like, yeah, sure, I'll take it.
It's like 65. We're still very early days of rock, right? That era.
Yeah.
The Vickers had this #1 hit in Finland and even toured there. And the Lemmy was quick to clarify that having a #1 in Finland is nearly meaningless in terms of sales. He's making jokes before even we can make the jokes. And because this came up, I just want to clarify again, I triple checked. The band is definitely from the UK. They are not Finnish, but they just dressed like Finnish people. And this gimmick seemed to work in Finland.
Great.
That was enough. That's enough in 1965. All right.
So this is really his first experience with some level of touring, with some light version of rock stardom, right? They have charting singles. They're touring extensively within the UK. They're occasionally venturing over to continental Europe, but it is just not enough for Lemmy. Okay, he leaves the rocking Vickers. He wants to be London big. Totally different thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yep.
he moves down there. He's living 12 guys to a flat. There's no money. But the one dude he happens to know in London happens to be sharing an apartment with Noel Redding at the time.
Jeez.
And when Noel's fledgling band needs an extra set of hands, Lemmy gets recruited as a roadie for the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
Oh, damn.
Yes.
It must have been from the very early days of the Experience even getting off the ground, because they made it seem like most of it was during the time when they were known in England, but not at all known in the States.
Right.
I should mention, maybe he was only a passing figure. He said he didn't interact with Jimmy too much directly. He was just hired help, right? And Jimmy was this fast rising star.
That kind of explains a lot too, because I've met a couple roadies. My buddy Trevor has been a roadie for Black Sabbath and AC/DC and Ozzy Osbourne, and so all these guys were at his wedding. It's a rough and tough group of people.
Oh, yeah, right.
That kind of helps me understand the direction he takes in this part of his story.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that kind of working class, because it is almost like a tradesman kind of job without any of the glamour of rock and roll, if you will, but kind of on the sidelines of rock and roll, moving shit around, and certainly all the drugs and some of the cast-off women, I'm sure. Well, so let me clarify. So as I said, he didn't interact much with Jimmy, but there was one job Jimmy needed him to do consistently, which was score him acid. He said he'd get Jimmy 10 hits, and Jimmy would break him off 3 of those hits, which Lemmy recounts as very fair. Now, and speaking of being a roadie and the lifestyle there, and he does say, I'm pretty sure that at this point Lemmy had been experimenting with drugs and alcohol for a little bit. We mentioned he started smoking at age 11, but this is when he starts to really make it his lifestyle. And he's quoted as saying something like, you cannot go on a 3-month tour without being on something. I don't care what they say. Keep fit, eat your greens, drink juice, fuck off. Okay. And by something, he's referring to acid, weed, dexedrine, mandrax, blues, in quotes, black beauties, Tuinol, methadrine, amphetamine sulfate, aka speed, and one unfortunate time, atropine, aka belladonna. So he and some friends took a lot of it accidentally, thinking it was speed. He ended up having to be administered an antidote at a hospital.
It was ephedrine? What was it?
It's called atropine. It's also known as belladonna. Apparently, in the Victorian era, I think women used to use a very small amount of it to make their pupils dilate. That's why it's called belladonna.
Ah, okay.
But it's a strong poison / hallucinogen. We're not going to go into the pharmacology of it. You can look up the Wikipedia article.
But you need an antidote. You don't just ride it out. You need an antidote. Jesus Christ.
And he even mentioned that the antidote to belladonna took 2 weeks to fully work. Lemmy said it was a weird time while he was waiting for the antidote to work. He'd be at home reading a book and look down and realize that there was no book and that he wasn't even at home.
That's ridiculous.
So the drug thing is going to continue. I hope you realize. So one time he tells a story about how they bought a canister of mandrax, which recall is sort of the British equivalent to Quaaludes.
Right.
But by the time they opened it up, it had melted in the heat. They're not going to let it go to waste, obviously. So they laid it out, used a rolling pin and like a hair dryer, and wound up with a paper sheet of mandrax that you'd break a square off of and eat it. And he said sometimes you get nothing, just the outer coating of the pill or whatever. Sometimes you'd get 3 hits. They called it opiate Russian roulette.
Oh my God. Wow. Damn. When you talked about lifestyle, I was going to make fun of the choice of the word lifestyle. It's like, no, this is his lifestyle. This is what he's building his existence around.
Yeah, and you didn't even say alcohol. You skipped. You didn't even bother. You didn't even have to say it. You just skipped over that.
Of course. And speaking of clever turns of phrase from this beastly legend, Lemmy has some real gems to quote. And I've compiled a few of them into a little segment I'd like to call Did Lemmy Say It?
All right.
First quote, horses make women horny.
Oh, of course.
Yes, because I know that he worked at a horse farm or something at one point in his life. So I'm going to say yes.
That's correct. He did say it. He worked at a horse stable as a lad, and this was the main learning he took from that period. Next up, the quote is, I've never had a problem with drugs. I've had problems with the police.
I'm going to say that's like a Tupac quote.
Lemmy did not say that. That is not a Lemmy quote. That was the other stalwart of rock and roll insanity, Keith Richards. Okay, next up. When it came to chicks, we weren't really worried about quality in my band.
That's a yes.
That's gotta be true, right?
I feel like you invented the word chicks because it's in some of the song lyrics.
Correct. I mean, look, have you seen Lemmy up close? He's a rock and roll singer, but he's kind of grotesque also.
He's got warts. He
does. He does. Okay, I got a couple more here. Next one up. I don't especially recommend my lifestyle. It will slaughter the average person.
It's got to be real.
Yes, Lemmy did say it. And in fact, in 1980, Lemmy tried getting new blood, which was a procedure for rock stars. Apparently the doctors told him, if we give you this fresh blood, it will kill you.
Shut up. That's ridiculous.
Your insides are too toxic for regular human blood. Now that certainly could be an exaggeration, but that's the story.
That's great.
Okay. I just have a couple more here to round this segment out. Next quote, some may live, but the crazy never die.
That's from a movie. I don't think that's Lemmy.
Yeah, it's like Jim Morrison or something.
That is yet another drug-addled poet of the modern age, Hunter S. Thompson, not Lemmy.
Ah, all right.
And finally, last one. Speaking about an approximately 10-year-old girl in passing, I'm going to be dating her in 10 years. Can you believe it?
So a man of sound morals. I believe it.
Oh, man. I don't know.
No, that was not Lemmy. That was convicted felon and current Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump.
Oh!
B-roll from 1992. Thus concludes our segment, Did Lemmy Say It?
Wow, very nice. Just the idea of the blood transfusion thing is insane. Like, can you his blood was toxic, so mixing it was going to do something? Oh my God.
This guy walks the walk. I do have to say, I think all evidence points to the fact that this guy talks the talk and he lives it too. He lives the rock and roll lifestyle.
He was ahead of the game. Now every like Silicon Valley exec has a blood boy, specifically for that purpose.
And I should be clear, overall, Lemmy actually comes off like a pretty decent guy. Definitely gruff, definitely into 70s rock and roll excess, but not overly slimy, which maybe subverts my expectation a little bit.
And he has a great sense of humor.
He has a great sense of humor, exactly.
Which is wild.
And I'm glad to hear some of this because in the interviews that I've watched, A, I could barely understand him, and B, it was only about all of the insane, terrible stuff. So hearing like the insight, like, oh, he was a Beatles fan and
He liked ponies.
he liked ponies.
In addition to all that, he has a lot of reverence for musicians and rock and rollers that came before him. I hear him talk about those a lot, and we'll mention a couple others as it goes. Okay, so back to our story, right? Drugs, as we know, are great at a lot of things, but what they can really help with is making new friends. So he bonds with a guy called Dick Mick. What's his name?
I think it's how you pronounced it.
Is that one name or two names?
It's one name, no space.
Okay.
Dikmik.
Okay, it's Dick Mick. Okay.
And Dick Mick was in Hawkwind, and he bonds with him through their mutual love of speed.
Right, of course.
Now, there is a Hawkwind record with Lemmy playing on it on Robert Dimery's list as well. It's called Space Ritual. So we're going to save diving into that band for another day. They have a whole interesting story, I'm sure. They were a very experimental, loose collective of early psych rock noisemakers, right? But we're going to quickly relate Lemmy joining and then ultimately leaving that band to form Motorhead, just to get on with our story. So he's friends with the one guy in the band. And one night, the Hawkwind bass player does not show up for the gig. They're frantically looking around for a bass player. And his mate Dick Mick goes, hey, Lemmy plays bass. Now, at this point, I should remind you that Lemmy plays guitar and has never, ever touched a bass. But...
So he is a natural bass player.
Exactly. But the actual bass player who flaked, his bass was left behind. And according to Lemmy, they just throw him on stage that night with no prep. He claims he had zero idea what he was doing, but says it must have gone all right because I was with them for 4 years.
Damn.
Dude, that is a great introduction to the band story. Wow.
Yeah, they seem pretty out there in a lot of ways. I am excited to get into them and tell their story another time, but audio, visual, acid heads, that seems like that was just the type of band it was. No one knew who was going to show up for which gig, that kind of thing. So he tours with Hawkwind for years, and he even writes some songs with them, and he even sings on some of those songs, and you can go back and listen to some of those. His voice is actually quite different, much more melodious, let's say. But he eventually gets fired after getting arrested at the Canadian border with speed. Now, Lemmy mentions several times, I think he might be still holding a grudge, that he was fired not for doing drugs, but for doing the wrong drugs. Because everyone else in the band was deep into acid, but his speed habit was considered uncouth and ungentlemanly.
And could get you arrested. Was acid illegal at this point, or was this that weird in between? Because if everybody else is just walking around town with it.
It's a good point. No, it must have been illegal by now, because now we must be around 1970 or 70.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
Because he's in the band for like 4 years. Yeah, so he ends up leaving the band in 75. The point is, they were all free love and drugs, but they just didn't like the drugs he was doing. They thought that was uncool.
Got it.
Okay, so here he finds himself in 1975. He's a bass player now, after 4 years of playing with Hawkwind, with some scenester cred, but without a band. He decides to make his own, of course, right? He forms Motorhead pretty much instantly upon returning to the UK. The concept for the band is MC5 with Little Richard mixed together.
Wait, that was the concept?
That's the concept, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Which that actually really helped me contextualize the music we're going to listen to. I think there is a lot of early rock and roll like Little Richard in there. It's much noisier, but it has a lot of those elements.
Right. Also someone probably who was on a lot of speed. And also real quick, sure, maybe he got kicked out of Hawkwind for doing different drugs, but imagine you're in a band with a bunch of people on acid and you're on speed. Imagine those shows.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm sure there were other reasons too. I mean, it sounds like he was trying to push his way to the front of the band. He was writing more material, he was singing more material, and there was some politics, inter-band politics, as there would be, right? With the guy who felt like it was his band that was not Lemmy. So anyway, he goes home, he forms a band. The original name for the group, this is a great name actually, is Bastard.
Oh, man.
Ooh, it's pretty good.
That's real cool.
But he is advised that Top of the Pops won't let him on the air with that name, so he changes it to the U.S. slang name for a speed freak, and that is Motorhead.
Nice.
Now, not coincidentally at all, Motorhead was the name of the last song he wrote and recorded with Hawkwind, and he sings on it too. So there's a recording of Hawkwind doing the song Motorhead, and there's a recording of Motorhead doing it. So it's kind of interesting.
Why do you put the O umlaut over the second O? Is there something there?
There's no particular reason other than to look cool or to look tough.
Okay.
But it is postulated one of the bands they toured with early on in, I think even in the Rockin' Vickers day, or maybe it was the Hawkwind days. Anyway, a band he knew from the scene in the UK was Blue Oyster Cult, who also has an unnecessary umlaut.
Oh.
Yeah, I've never noticed that. Wow. All right.
So this band comes together pretty quick. I'm sure you were thinking it took a lot of deep planning to get Motorhead together, but no, he's fired in May of 1975. Motorhead's first gig is in July of 1975.
So I assume he kept the bass that he stole from the other.
Yeah, it's a good question. He probably left with the bass. That was his going away present. Yeah.
That's that Rickenbacker, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so in this first gig, in this first incarnation, they're playing songs, Hawkwind songs that Lemmy wrote for Hawkwind, plus a couple new tunes, plus covers. And despite some initial success and momentum, there's some speed bumps. I put speed in quotes, get it?
Nice.
They get a record deal. They make a record for United Artists, but it ends up getting shelved because the label isn't satisfied. It ends up coming out years later as a cash-in after they get a little more cred, called On Parole. But technically, that is the first thing they recorded ever. While they're waiting to find out what happens to that recording, because the label isn't super forthcoming, they're under contract, whatever, they get a different label to pay for a single, which they make. But then the first label won't let them release it because they're still under contract. So they're running into all these challenges. They can't get a single or an album out, right? The band undergoes some swap outs, but at this point, after some of that legal label-based kerfuffle, the classic lineup of Motorhead, the one that plays on Ace of Spades and that the fans consider the classic lineup, is cemented. So let's just go over who is in this band. We have Phil Filthy Animal Taylor on drums. We have, of course, Lemmy Kilmister on bass, and we have a guy called Fast Eddie Clarke on guitar. I feel like he got the worst name, but he's pretty good.
Fast Eddie, yeah.
Now, interestingly, the story I heard is that Fast Eddie came in to audition with the band as a second guitar player on top of the other guy that was there previously for that first recording. But for some bizarre reason, after the audition, the first guy quits, and they're like, I guess we have to hire this other guy. So they tried to make it into quartet. They couldn't do it. That's the story.
That drummer, Filthy Taylor, man, that guy's a piece of work. Some of the interviews I saw,
Oh yeah,
he looks like
a raccoon with a mustache or something.
Just a bald raccoon. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a character. We're going to get into some of his antics shortly. So finally now they're off contract. Lineup is cemented, but unfortunately the momentum had died. You know, think about it. He's coming off of Hawkwind. He's got some cred. They play some shows. They're getting a little heat. And through these label woes and lineup changes, it just kind of dies down. They actually all agree to quit the band, right? And they even book a farewell show to end the band officially.
Oh, wow.
But yet another label guy intervenes and says they should record that show with a mobile recording studio, which was fresh, new, cool tech at the time. Now, unsurprisingly, that guy probably taking some kind of drugs with the band when he suggested that does not come through. But at the last second, the guy says, you know what? I'll pay for you to go into the studio and record a single, right? Before you break up. You should at least do that. Let's do that, right? So they have 2 days in the studio, but instead of finishing one song, they take a big swing and they do 11 songs.
Oh, wow.
In 2 days? Jeez, all right.
By never stopping, because they're taking, wait for it, lots and lots of speed.
Oh, so wait, are you saying that the recording isn't sped up?
No, the recording is not sped up. This is what becomes the first release called Motorhead, the self-titled release, right? Now, incidentally, this album has some of the previously recorded Hawkwind songs, like I mentioned. It also has a cover of Train Kept A-Rollin', which is an old song, but we probably all know it from Aerosmith.
Yep.
Last just weird thing, reason for me to plug one of our old episodes, a cover they record and leave off the record is ZZ Top's Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers. So if you want to hear us give our thoughts on that particular tune, go back all the way to episode 19, where we covered ZZ Top's Trace Hombres.
That is a great album and a great episode, yes.
When we were but wee lads poking our heads over the consoles here. So now the band is rolling. They got some wind under their sails. Things are finally starting to happen. They schedule a tour. And then literally the night before their first gig, the drummer punches a junkie and breaks his finger. So what do? Speed. No. No, they go on with the tour. Every night they tape a drumstick into his casted hand with gaffer's tape and play the shows that way.
Shut up. Oh my God.
Because, listen, drugs can get you through a lot. Let's be clear.
By the way, I saw an interview with the drummer and he said he slapped the guy and broke all his knuckles. I'm like, wait a minute. Hang on. Does slap mean something different in England?
That could have referred to one of 100 incidents, because I think this guy gets in a lot of fights. We're going to hear about more injuries that waylay the band. So anyway, that tour goes pretty well. The band's really rolling now. They book a bigger tour, and the drummer breaks his wrist 2 shows in. Speed, sadly, will not fix that one. So they have to cancel. They're very close to calling it quits again as a band. The momentum they had built at this point had dissipated. The record they released didn't do too much, and the band is restless, with the guys even taking breaks to go play gigs with other bands, like actively trying to poach them. But luckily, at the last second, a new record company swoops in and signs them for a single. They head into the studio and they record a cover of, get this, Louie Louie.
Oh, God.
And it somehow cracks the top 100. It's like hits 68.
It's like they're doing everything possible to fail. It's just not working.
I've heard that version. I can't stand that version. They occasionally play it on classic rock radio. And he sounds like... All right, so the very first time I ever heard Motorhead, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13, and I was still watching the Power Rangers, which was a kid's television show, and there was a villain on there named Goldar. And he would talk like this. And I heard Motorhead, and I thought, oh my God, the same guy, the cartoon villain Goldar, has started a band. So hearing him sing Louie, Louie with his interesting pronunciation never rubbed me the right way.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't think Lemmy's voice, he's not going to do an album of standards anytime soon, I think.
Yeah, right.
So... That little minimal success leads to their second album called Overkill. The third album is called Bomber. That ends up charting at 11. The whole time they've been building an audience by touring constantly. So now finally we're up to the recording of this record, Ace of Spades, in the summer of 1980.
Nice.
They've been working for the last couple episodes. They've been working with a different guy called Jimmy Miller to produce the previous 2 records, which that guy's claim to fame, and it's a big one, is producing all the major Stones records, including Let It Bleed and Sticky Fingers. And if you want to hear us talk about Let It Bleed, covered it on episode 84. But definitely great bona fides as a producer, but they aren't fully satisfied. They want to better capture the live energy of the band, the intensity, and they decided to change up the producer to a guy called Vic Mahl. This was a guy who had worked the mobile studio that actually recorded that Hawkwind live album called Space Ritual, the one that is also on Robert Dimery's list that we will eventually get to.
Not to be confused with Dick Lick or whatever the guy's name is.
Not Dick Mick. Dick Mick was in the band Hawkwind, and his job was I'm excited to get to Hawkwind literally, because I think Dick Mick's job was like noise maker or something. Like he just literally just twiddled knobs, and they would like dose the entire crowd at their shows and stuff. Like it sounds like it was a wild time.
That's funny.
But this guy Vic Mahl just worked with the band, and now he's going to work with Motorhead. His nickname, by the way, is the Turtle, because he looks like a turtle. Not only does he not do drugs or drink or have any kind of hard living, he's like the quietest, most unassuming guy. He's a diabetic. And as Lemmy said, like, I think this was part of it because they felt like they couldn't just bowl over him because he would like die. So they had to kind of be nice to him. I think this helped in their minds. But he said Lemmy thought the guy really instinctively understood rock and roll. He thought Vic was the perfect guy for them. And, you know, this is one of the things I think that makes Lemmy come off like a reasonable dude, which he's like, all bands need someone who's not in the band to sit there and be an asshole. And this guy was able to be an asshole to us, even though we were big, scary guys, wild men, and we wouldn't wrestle him to the ground and pummel him, I guess, for fear of his death. So they head to a place called Rickmansworth. Sure, I'm pronouncing that wrong. Just north of London.
Yeah, you got it.
The place called Jackson Studios in August of 1980 for the recording. They end up spending about 6 weeks on this thing. Now, I searched high and low for details about recording sessions here because by Lemmy's own admission, this 6 weeks was way longer than it took to make any of their previous records. And to be honest, like, I am also surprised based on what's on the tape. There's very little detail. I'm guessing that's because most of the record is live with some vocal overdubs and guitar overdubs occasionally. But, a lot of it does sound like a live band. So I think they definitely accomplished that.
Yeah. Yep.
Probably a couple like hospital visits, hospital breaks in between,
A couple of days off for hangovers in there. So I read that one of the reasons that it did take longer, though, is because this new producer, Vic, really pushed them to work harder, to refine the material more, to work more on the riffs, make them a little more complex, get better takes, etc. This is also apparently the first time the band had either no say or almost no say in the mixing stage. The result of which, according to the band itself, is that for once you could actually hear everything.
You can. I mean, it's all a little compressed, but you can hear everything.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, it's funny for me to try to picture Lemmy in the studio with like a notepad and a pencil being like, oh, we should go to like the diminished seventh there, or whatever it would be. I'm sure they're not hitting any diminished chords, but
yeah, he's like
the idea of them like workshopping a song is so foreign to me. It sounds like he would walk in and be like, here's the song, play it or die. Like that's it.
Yeah. Actually, it's like here's the title. We don't have a song yet. Just start playing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he does sound kind of like a WWF guy.
Yes,
but you hear the
totally.
You kind of hear the material that like Randy Savage would crank out, in the 90s.
I think he had some kind of WWF, WWE career later in life because he had some kind of relationship with Triple H, but I think he must have made some appearances on Monday Night Raw. So yeah, that fits.
Oh, that's wild. Nice.
Insane.
I don't have all the details on that, but okay. So Ace of Spades comes out in October of 1980 on Bronze Records. And that leads us to our very favorite segment here on the show. Let's do Motorhead by the numbers.
Woo! Let's do it.
Ooh, yeah.
All right. Number 13 is the first number. That is the highest the single Ace of Spades ever charted in the UK. When you asked that happen? In 2015, the week after Lemmy died at age 70.
Well, better late than never. All right, we'll take it.
When it came out, it was a charting hit. It peaked at 15, but I'm using that as an example to show that the album and the band have only gained in cult status as time has gone on, which is an interesting phenomenon in and of itself. Next up, 100K. That is the estimated number of copies sold of this album in the UK. Now, recall that that's a much smaller market than the US, so 300K in the UK is platinum. But for such a relatively well-known band and rock and roll figure, it's not that many.
Right.
Now, the album charted in the UK and in the US at the time of its release. Their follow-up live album, called No Sleep Till Hammersmith, sold about the same and is also on Dime Race lists. So for sure, this is the band's peak era. Next number 28, the highest chart position on the US Billboard Hot 100 that Lemmy ever got to. And what he estimates to be the most lucrative song for him overall is the 1990s Ozzy hit Mama, I'm Coming Home, for which Lemmy wrote the lyrics.
No way.
Oh, I did not know. That's a good song. That's great.
Now, Lemmy has made it clear that while Ace of Spades gave him a living in music, he ain't rich. And he did say several times that this song paid him more than anything Motorhead had done up to that point.
Wow. That's wild. All right.
Okay, we have two more. Next number is number 17. That is the age of the president of the U.S. Motorhead fan club back in 1980, who was very excited to get his hands on this Ace of Spades record. His name was Lars Ulrich.
No way.
Soon to be drummer for fledgling thrash metal band Metallica, which formed about 1 year later.
He definitely speaks highly of Metallica.
Yeah, and I do think they're one of the most obvious pieces of the lineage of Motorhead. That kind of fast and heavy thing. I think Metallica if I may say, even on Metallica's first album, expanded on it, made it more complex, added in some of that kind of progginess that I think we all love. But definitely Motorhead is seen as a progenitor of that thrash genre that was just about to pop off, right? And lastly, in the By the Numbers segment, we have at least one, and that is the number of historically bad bass players that Lemmy inspired with his words. Now, in White Line Fever, he tells the story of giving bass lessons to one Sid Vicious. But after 3 lessons, he had to tell him, Sid, you can't play bass. And Sid apparently responded with, yeah, I know, and then walked away sullenly into the waiting arms of uber punk band in need of bad bass player, the Sex Pistols.
Wow. All right.
And last but not least, I'm not going to attach a number to it, but we just want to say thank you for listening to this show every week, for telling your friends about it, for getting on the Motorhead subreddit and yelling and complaining about whatever the heck we're about to say about these songs. We love it. We do this for our enjoyment, of course, but we're super happy that your enjoyment. If you want to support us, of course, just listening every week is a great way to do that. If you want to go a step farther, leave us a 5-star review on any podcast app that accepts ratings or reviews like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you want to go a step further, hop on over to Patreon. We have the link in the show notes every week. We have a great community there. You can join for free. You can continue the discussion about this album. There's a great comment thread now every week. And of course, we publish bonus content, have votes on what albums we're going to do coming up, things like that. Go join. It's free. We would love you for it. Okay, we are almost to talking about the songs, but I just thought we'd do a little bit of aftermath here. So on the eve of the tour to support the record, Ace of Spades, Filthy Phil is at a bar and breaks his neck.
Oh, God.
Now, luckily, he's only paralyzed temporarily.
Oh, that's good.
But this dude, I don't know if you saw this in the video you watched, but this dude has a calcium lump the size of a lemon on the back of his neck for the rest of his life because of that.
God. They're really a band of gargoyles. It's remarkable.
Now, I alluded to it in the story, but this band, and particularly this record, were really inspiring. Certainly for the up-tempo thrash metal bands that were about to come on the scene, including the so-called Big Four of Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax. But another musical note is that this also cross-pollinated with punk, really for the first time, and the burgeoning hardcore scene, this fast and loud aesthetic. So whereas metal godfathers like Black Sabbath slowed everything down to make it evil, Motorhead deserves some credit or blame for ramping things up. And, the drug speed also deserves some of that credit.
Sure.
I kept hearing again and again that this was the one thing in the 80s that the punks and the metalheads could agree on. It kind of was the meeting point of those two genres. And lastly, this Motorhead lineup that we've been describing, it lasted for one more studio album only, released in 1982, but Motorhead, the band, kept releasing albums, 22 of them, in fact, up until Lemmy's death,
Jeez.
at the age of 70 in 2015 from a combination of congestive heart failure and prostate cancer. And that, of course, is when the band officially called it quits.
Wow.
I mean, how could you go on without him,
I'm surprised he made it that far.
We all are.
Right? That's really impressive.
Yeah.
Good on you, dude.
Indeed. Okay. Do you want to get into some songs, gents?
Hell
Let's do
yes.
it.
All right. Let's go ahead and go through the album chronologically. First, we're going to revisit the opening track, the title track. We're going to try to find a different section of the song. I think it will be hard. It's called Ace of Spades.
Double up or quit, double strike or split, the ace of spades, the ace of spades. You know I'm going to lose, and gambling's for fools, but that's the way I like it, baby, I don't want to live forever. And don't forget the joker.
I imagine buying this record and not knowing who this band is and within the first minute being like, wow, these guys don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
I think the drummer invented the open hi-hat blast beat that they do in almost every song. And I haven't heard many drummers do that before this.
I think that might be true. In fact, I did hear Lars say, and a few other metal drummers say, that specifically they cited a song, I think it was on the previous album, or maybe the second Motorhead album, that might have been, at least from their perspective, the first time they ever heard the blast beat version of double bass.
Yep.
Yeah, this song rocks, dude. This is first of all, it's a hell of a fuzz bass intro there. Like, we haven't really touched on it yet, but Lemmy is a bass player in quotes, but he plays that thing like a rhythm guitar.
He really does. He's definitely team pick, I assume.
Oh, yeah, big time.
But this tune is unrelenting. You want to talk about starting an album off? Man, this is a full-on frontal assault. And I went and I did listen to Overkill this week, which I think was one or two prior, maybe the prior one. And you had mentioned that the producer for this album wanted that much more raw, much more live sound. And man, did they nail it. This does really sound like you are in the room and they are just playing hard, loud, and fast versus Overkill was a bit more produced, a little cleaner. So they're definitely getting their point across here.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think I say this about that much music, but this is begging to be played loud. Like, every time I put these songs on, I was just like, the volume's not high enough yet. I gotta keep going. It's not the same as for the other stuff I'm listening to,
Totally.
The fuzz bass intro, just the tone, but maybe just coming in with that bass so aggressive, reminded me a little bit of Sabotage, the Beastie Boys song. Did you get any of that?
Oh, yeah. Like, yeah.
People don't normally go this hard on fuzz bass.
Yeah.
And at the front of the song, too. You're right.
So another funny thing I learned, of course, the song is a bunch of gambling metaphors smashed together. It's all about cards and dice. And Lemmy does like gambling, but weirdly, he has a huge and completely unabashed love of slot machines, which he calls one-armed bandits.
Okay.
which are not mentioned. Less cool.
Well, I saw in the Behind the Music documentary, they said that when, I guess, he moved to LA and he was kind of living in squalor and he had a specific bar that he liked to go to, and he would just go in there and sit in front of this little video poker machine and just drink. And like, it was Lemmy from Motorhead. You could have just walked in and just talked to him.
Yeah, it was called like Rosie's or something. Yeah, he would just like, he like lived there. It was like by his apartment in like LA.
Yeah. And apparently he lived the whole time he was in LA, I think he lived in like a 2-room apartment, like not a nice place. Now, admittedly, he doesn't have tons of money. He's made that pretty clear. The band was moderately successful, but not enough to make him rich. But he's also, he's just a simple man who likes what he likes.
And to think like they probably inspired like G.G. Allen to take that not giving a fuck about anything to the absolute extreme.
Yeah. Listen, I hope it hasn't gotten muddled throughout the first 45 minutes of this podcast. I had never heard this before. This rocks. I do like it.
Oh, totally.
I see why people like it. It's easy to understand. And I think a lot of it is good. And I think this is a terrific example.
Sure.
It's partly because you're starting off the album and I'm not at all fatigued with this type of music yet, which I think happens a few songs in to a certain extent. But
right.
Yeah, this is a great mission statement as a band. I was going to mention that my first exposure to Motorhead, and specifically this song, was on the soundtrack of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, sometime probably in the early 2000s or whenever that came out, which I played incessantly in college. And I just remember that in passing, I labeled it as punk rock in my mind. It didn't even really occur to me that it was metal or, you know what I mean? I wasn't really listening to it, but to me, it was interesting to come back and revisit something that I would have called punk rock back then. And I see why it's connected to punk rock, the tradition of punk rock, but it actually does sound a lot more rock and roll now.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally.
Oh, one more thing I wanted to call out, because they don't have a lot of frills and production touches in these songs, let's be honest. And I know that was the point, but there's that bridge section where there's some kind of woodblock situation going on. They're clapping wood blocks together.
You find a little bit of things and they're always in the middle of the song. You're like, oh, was that a weird people talking or like a snake rattle or, something like that going on. But yeah, it's
there's something kind of cool that helps it along. And it's sometimes just a little touch like that, a little tonal change. I don't think it's the drummer just playing a woodblock because there's too much of it happening. It has to be an overdub, I think.
Maybe it's the diabetic coming in.
His peg leg coming in. Anyway,
let's move it right on down the line to the second song on the album and the second song on our focus list. This one is called Love Me Like a Reptile.
Do I have to fight you, baby, when I first laid eyes on you? That woman turned me on. I can't believe it's true. And I like to watch your body sway. I got no choice. I'm gonna twist your tail. Love me like a reptile. Love me like a reptile. I gotta sink my fangs in you.
Can you feel the romance with this one? It's just
Look,
sentimental.
Say what you will about these guys. They pick a theme and they stick to it. Every verse is about snakes.
you're right. First started with gambling. Now we're on reptiles and snakes. You're right. They stick with it.
I think it's a great title. Half the battle of writing songs like this is getting the title right, and they do have some good titles. Let's start there, right? This feels to me. Here's a band. I guess I mentioned him in my tweet. Weirdly, I didn't hear Lemmy bring him up in his book, but this feels straight out of the AC/DC playbook to me, which I'm totally cool with. I like Bon Scott era, especially live AC/DC, right? And if that's not landing to you, or if you haven't listened to AC/DC in a while, don't just pick any old album. Don't listen to Back in Black or any of that bullshit. Go to the Bon Scott era live record if you want blood to hear what I'm talking about. It's this kind of stripped down rock and roll title first songwriting, but they're definitely cross-pollinating some influences there, I think.
This song, I do like the groove, but upon first listen, I went to ChatGPT and asked if it could generate a version of the Friends theme song where Lemmy is singing the words, because the intro of this, I can't get that ding dee 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 ding ding dee ding ding. It fits right over.
Funny.
It fits right over the first couple chords. But outside of that, it's a pretty badass song. I didn't realize they were saying reptile. I thought he was saying red tail until I went and actually looked at what the words were and the title was.
All the other references to snakes weren't a giveaway.
It didn't click. I was like, are red tails?
The rattlesnake rattle at the very beginning of the song.
It didn't tip me off. There is a breakdown at 2:37, which is very cool. And there are those moments like you were talking about throughout the album. They're not everywhere, but they are occasionally peppered throughout that kept me interested because it is just straight ahead, 3.5 minutes, go hard. So those little breathing room areas were nice.
Shock you like electric eel. Oh.
I totally agree. And I like to think of that as some of the influence of the producer. That he's like, yeah, we just need a little something extra here. They don't want to change him too much, but if we're going to just go full blitzkrieg on the audience and on your ears, we need some little changes in there. And there aren't tons and tons of them to hang your hat on. I think this is a very successful song. I actually am a little surprised something like this isn't a bigger hit, because I think it is a great title to reference. If I just came up with this title, I'd be like, I'm definitely going to finish writing that one.
And it so fits the personality of the band. They all look like reptiles. So, I mean, it like fits this kind of gargoyle-ish thing of there's nothing like pretty anywhere. Everything's dark. It's almost like you mentioned Mad Max, but I'm thinking, what's the other one with Harrison Ford? They redid it.
Blade Runner?
Blade Runner. Everything's like dirty trucker, right? Like everything just has there's just a layer of sludge on top of everything. And it works.
Right.
It's true. Yeah. Okay. Shall we keep this train rolling? Next song up is called We Are the Road Crew.
Another time, another place, another girl, another face, another life I lead, another beer is what I need, another gig my ears bleed. Way on the road go. Another town I've left behind, another dream completely blind, another hotel I can't.
This song has my favorite lyrics. I'm not sure if it's my favorite song, but I just like I think they do a good job of getting the title captured with the lyrics.
I think it's another great song topic. I was just thinking as I said the title of the song to introduce it that was kind of a better singing take than Lemmy gives on the whole record. But no, it's a great topic, and it did really become one of their signature songs, and the guys in the road crew that they worked with were sentimental about it and liked kind of being, mentioned. Those are the people that feel often forgotten, even though they're prepping, moving stuff and setting up the stage for the shows we enjoy, right? So, but speaking of lyrics, Marty, I did notice that he says another tube of super glue.
So I had that written down too. And I was like, is that a drug reference? Because when you were naming the list of drugs earlier, of which there was like 15,
yeah,
I wasn't sure if that was some part of the thing, like sniffing glue. Gluing their fingers back on when they get cut off, or like whatever.
I have a theory. So I worked with a couple sound guys, and again, it's small time in comparison to anything that these professional guys are doing. But gaffer's tape was like number one, and number two is whenever they would cut themselves, they would have super glue. And if it was bad enough, they would just glue over it and keep going, because a Band-Aid's going to fall off. It's going to get caught up and stuff. So they would just have a tube of super glue, and they would glue their finger closed over the wound and then keep working.
Especially for bass players,
right?
Which is like the most finger shredding, if you're playing it that hard and fast.
Yeah, seriously.
It's the most cutting instrument. But yes, I wasn't sure what that reference was. I was like drugs or something else.
No, Adam's take sounds correct. That makes sense to me. I've heard of people in the kitchen staff doing stuff like that too. I do like the song. I think it has a great intro. I kind of wish they did more stuff like the intro, which is little breaks from just being thrashy all the time. These like rhythmic hits. And so my complaint about the song is this is how fast and insane this band is. By 1 minute in, they've ripped through 2 long verses and 2 choruses, 1 line choruses. That's economy, baby, right? It's going econo.
And they still managed to get a pretty decent guitar solo in there.
They get 2 solos in, so then they go to the solo.
2 solos, okay.
Then at 1:20, they've exhausted all their material twice through, actually. 3 times through, depending on how you think about it, because the solo was over the same chords as the verse and chorus went over. And then they just reset which, okay, that's fine. Solo's cool. Second solo is kind of fun. I do think he's a fun, cool guitar player, wild and loose and interesting. It extends the song, but why didn't they end the song? Like, the song just kind of fades out at a random spot in second solo. Why didn't they bring it home with, for instance, the hits from the beginning? That would have been really easy to do.
Right. I like, there's the occasional thing vocally that Lemmy does. And it happens a couple times throughout the album where he'll shout something to like trigger off a part of the song. And in here, he screams, "That's right." And the solo starts. And it's like, it's really cool. Like,
right.
When Steven Tyler goes, "Oh, guitar," and the guitar solo comes in. This is his version of that. So I really dug that little tidbit, because he was in the studio saying it.
Totally, yeah. And I read too that he would only record his vocals when no one else could see him. So there was no window in the overdub vocal booth. Even the engineer couldn't see him. He needed to be in complete isolation to do his thing.
That's so funny to think about somebody that intimidating still being a little intimidated by the process, a little shy.
He probably has to like take off part of his uniform. He's in like a t-shirt and sweat shorts, and he can't be seen without his like pirate hat on.
Did you hear this? It was in one of the documentaries about him where sometime in the 90s he was living in LA and he was hanging out at the same rehearsal space as Anthrax, and they had the main dude from Anthrax. I think his name's Scott something, the guy with the long
Scott Ian,
the long beard. And I think he was either playing a slot machine in the lobby or a pinball machine of some sort. And Scott Ian talked about how he'd pass by him in the hall like a whole bunch before he worked up the nerve to say hi to him. But that Lemmy was leaning over this pinball machine with like super like Daisy Duke short shorts. And he eventually had to just like ask him like, "Hey man, nice to meet you. You're great. What's up with the shorts?" And Lemmy's just like, "What? It's hot."
Oh, man.
He can't not wear jeans. He can't not wear denim constantly.
Let's talk about Lemmy's voice just for a second. I mean, we've been touching on it, but it just sounds, I guess it's not this. It's just an affect that he's chosen of kind of shouty vocals. But it really sounds like someone who is at the end of 3 sets and has nothing left in the tank and is just pushing harder and harder on their vocal cords to try to hit notes, which is really not good for you. That's how you lose your voice the next day.
It's like the Harry Nilsson, like Pussycats album where he destroyed his vocal cords, but then all his best takes were after that point. Yeah, he's like on the brink every song, it sounds like.
Well, to throw it back to a Beatles thing, what about the Twist and Shout rendition from the first Beatles album where they supposedly waited till the very end to let John do the take because they knew he was going to blow out his voice, but it has all that great gravel in it, for that reason.
Oh, yeah.
It just doesn't sound like a healthy approach to singing.
No, it doesn't. Nor is it enjoyable. I'm not saying that they were trying to make pleasant music, but yeah, it just seems a missed opportunity for even one song or a half of one song for him to just back it off 30%. And Marty, you had said something like, I heard a little bit of him trying to like actually sing or something like that. A couple more of those moments probably would have made this go down a little easier for me.
Oh, he does have another voice, though. That's what's strange about it, because if you listen to, I think it's the biggest Hawkwind hit, Silver Machine, that's him singing. And he sounds like a normal human being singing it.
Wow, you're right. He actually has some high end, too. Maybe he blew it all out with all the speed and smoking and booze, but it sounds like he actually could hit some notes back then.
I think part of it must be a choice, and that is really the main thing that's holding me back from fully embracing the band. I think I can take this band. Certainly, I would turn these songs up if they came up on the radio because they rocks. In isolation, I think they work amazingly well. But this question of can I really take 40 minutes of it or an hour-long concert of it, I'm not so sure, and it's because of this voice. And maybe one other small thing. Let's go on to the next song, which is called Jailbait.
Teenage baby, you're a sweet young thing. Still tied to mama's apron strings. I don't even dare to ask your age. It's enough to know you're here backstage. You're jailbait, and I just can't wait. Jailbait, baby, come on.
Oh, man. This, to me, was a low light. I know looking back 44 years ago, I don't want to judge it by our standards of today, but I think kind of any era, sex with underage girls is probably frowned upon, which is the implication here, right? Jailbait?
But what's funny is that it's not about shifting standards. By calling this person jailbait, he is clarifying that it is against the law.
Acknowledging, he's acknowledging that there are consequences.
You're absolutely right.
When Sam Cooke sings She Was Only 16, you can kind of convince yourself that the age of consent was different back then.
But this... Wow. This was definitely cringy. This was like an even worse version of Bon Jovi's cringe. This took it to another gutter level.
Listen, we can call this the low point. I'm fine with that. I think because the songs were kind of indistinguishable, I don't think there's a lot of variance. I'm just being honest. I don't like this song as much as Ace of Spades.
That's a really good point.
It is bad subject matter that makes me cringe. And I think this chorus amongst some other title first, fairly off the cuff choruses feels like the lamest to me. They're literally just shouting the title.
Yeah. Jailbait, baby, come on.
But my biggest problem with it is that it sounds a lot like another song. It brought to mind another hit song instantly when it came on. Did you guys get that?
Eric Clapton?
No, I was thinking of School's Out by Alice Cooper.
Oh, dude, totally. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, right.
Feels pretty similar to me. But, on balance, this is the kind of song I would expect Motorhead to record. I mean, the subject matter isn't really what's holding me back from liking it, to be clear.
Okay.
Same here. My comment on this is they're consistent. They're not out on any big branches or anything. You know, they're kind of just doing the same thing over and over again, and they know their sound.
Right.
There was another song on the record that I considered putting on as a low point called Dance. And that's, I thought, where they broke the most from their convention. And it actually sounded the most to me like a thrash punk rendition of a Little Richard or a Jerry Lee Lewis type number.
The old school rock and roll thing.
The old school rock and roll thing. Yeah, exactly. You have to keep in mind that it's funny that in the modern era, fewer chords just sort of smashed out over the course of a song without a lot of changes has become associated with things like punk. But it's also associated with early rock and roll. Those are all 3-chord songs.
Yeah.
Totally. Louie Louie.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that one. Okay. Let's move on to the next song, the last song on our focus list. It's the second to last song on the album. It is called The Chase is Better Than the Catch.
You know I'm bad, times I've had. I got a bad reputation. I don't care, I get my share. Don't feel no deprivation. I don't. The more I get, the better it is. I like it fine, I like a little whiz. Treat on my ladies, that's a fact. You know the chase is better than the catch, you know.
So this is my favorite song. I just thought it was a little bit different. This is a song where I noticed that he's attempting to sing. I feel like the bass playing's good. The only thing that was weird is when I first started the song, I thought to myself, wait, is this Keep On Rockin' in the Free World? And then it kind of goes somewhere else.
Check the playlist. Did I screw this up? Is this?
Yeah.
So I also like this song, and it stuck out to me because it did feel like a slightly different, slightly groovier version of what the band could be. This is giving more Judas Priest with laryngitis, which I like. It also has a breakdown, so it has some of those touches, like where it feels a little more worked. Particularly the breakdown feels like a big noticeable shift from their normal MO. Again, I think it's a cool title, which is like half the battle.
I was going to say, I really like The Chase is Better Than the Catch. I think that is great.
What's it mean when he says, I like a little whiz?
Somebody from England can write in.
Thinking about the simple pleasures.
The more I get, the better it is. I like it fine. I like a little whiz.
He's at Pat's Cheesesteaks ordering.
Right. He's in line in Philly. With whiz, please.
So interestingly, this is one of those albums, like a lot of albums from this era, that when it first came out, the track list was different than the one that got most widely distributed. This was the first song on the original, at least the US print of the original album. And Ace of Spades was the first song on the second side.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm seeing that now on the Wikipedia article. Okay, that is interesting.
I think the song is cool. This is probably the song I would put on a mix because it feels more underground than putting Ace of Spades on there. So I'll call it my favorite as well.
Right.
I like that he calls himself, speaking of lyrics, he does get off good lyrics occasionally, even though I don't get the sense he puts a lot of time into them. He calls himself a demon lech, which I really like.
That's pretty good.
That
That could be the cover band. That could be the tribute band for Motorhead.
Yeah, I'm ready. Dude, I'm ready. I think the three of us could handle it.
Definitely have to split up the vocals all night. We'd each make it through 2 songs.
So I do have one timestamp complaint. I mean, we've already been complaining about Lemmy's vocals, but if you go to 132 approx, he says, I feel your touch.
I love you, baby. Know you too much. I like you fine. I feel your touch. That your appearance.
touch.
That's a croaker. That's
I feel your touch.
for all this talk of quality control and the producer, the length of time they spent on it, they should have looped back and gotten that one.
Is that technically his voice squeaking? If that's even possible?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. I think we've gabbed enough here about Ace of Spades by Motorhead, the 1980 release. Now, what you've all been waiting for when we vote on whether or not this is actually a record you must hear before you die, and I'm going to throw it first to Marty.
I'm going to say yes on this one. It's not my type of music, and I don't see myself listening to it a lot, but I see the value. It would be music that if I was like rolling up to the East End in my car, and a bunch of like those guys that hung out there,
Yes.
back when we were in college, were looking at me, I would turn it down a little bit so they don't like.
Marty just referenced the grungy bar from our college town. Yes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel like worthy of listening to it because I'm not tough.
You're not hard enough.
I'm not hard enough, but I think it's cool. It's a good listen. I like similar to Rob. I had heard Ace of Spades before, but not the rest of the album, and I like the vibe, and I get it, and I think it's worthy of the list.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. Adam, what say you?
So, Rob, this podcast is doing its job. I came in to the episode tonight hell-bent that I was going to say no because I hated this week. Every time I listened to this, I just hurt. I was sore all over. My throat started hurting for some reason. But you told a really good story, some great background, some great insight into Lemmy, and you can't deny the influence that these guys have had on the music I love. I love System of a Down. If those guys aren't downstream from Motorhead, I don't know what is. So I think I'm going to say yes. Even though I didn't like the album, I think it's important. I think Lemmy's important. I think the band is important. Go ahead, do yourself a favor. Well, maybe not a favor, but listen to this album.
Awesome. Great. I'm going to round it out and make it unanimous. I think it's an easy yes for me. I thought it was a lot more fun than I expected it to be. I thought it would be a little more of a slog, but in fact, it rocked. It was fun learning about Lemmy's backstory and great personality and how he is more than willing to take the piss of himself and not take himself too seriously, adds character and color to this. And yeah, the lyrics, the approach, they're fun. Do I get a little tired listening to it? Yeah, sure. But I think you can get through it. It's a pretty short album full of short songs. Make sure to turn it up loud and listen.
Yes, a requirement.
Okay. Oh, I guess it stays with me now. So we have a couple things left to do.
Rob's talking a lot today. All right. I'll throw it over to you, Rob, for no reason, just to give you a 5-second break.
I forgot to congratulate the ghost of Lemmy. Lemmy, please don't kill us from beyond the grave.
Right.
I do think you're a really cool guy. Obviously, you're one of the coolest humans. So great job. You've made the list. Okay, couple things to do, as Adam just mentioned, and you've been sending us great emails. They get better every week, guys. Keep them coming. Let's dip our hands in there and read a letter or two. First up, we have Bradley listening in Miami. He writes, "Hey fellas, just finished listening to the Purple Rain episode."
Ooh.
That is an old one.
Yeah.
Number 61. We've given you lots of pathways to our back catalog today, audience. Bradley says, "I loved it. I spent much of it literally LOLing. Now, I was a high school junior when the record came out. I love it with a deep and abiding passion. Always have, always will, full stop. Yes, it's 1,000% youthful emotional attachment, and that attachment was 1,000% unexamined until I listened to your episode. Turns out, holy shit, there's a whole lot of mediocrity on there." So much so that as much as I agree with you guys about Prince's marketing genius, I started to wonder why this record hit me, my young self that is, and obviously millions like me, so hard. So I think there's something really important that you guys didn't really hit on: race. Remember that this was very much still, spoken or not, black music and white music separate in 1984. Michael Jackson getting on MTV was huge, but not for the oddballs like me and our ilk who were into new wave and punk. We freaking hated Michael Jackson. Prince was the first true crossover.
Right.
The dude that was able to appeal to everyone, punks, to freaks, to pop chicks, and to the black kids. We finally had a black guy we could dig, and dig him we did. Musically, his combination of rock and soul opened the door, and the tunes rocked. Plus, he was androgynous, provocative, and our parents couldn't possibly approve. So the point is, in that context, it's not even that the record's musical shortcomings were forgiven, it's that they weren't even heard. The record was in some ways more important than the music that was on it. Love you guys. My commute sucks, and you totally don't. Rock and roll.
That's heavy. Yeah.
Man, that was good.
And yes, thank you for that. That was great context. We love stuff like that for people who lived it and things we missed, especially contextual information about what was going on at the time. Of course, when art comes out, it's all about the context. It's all about what happens, and it's really challenging. What does Adam always say? We have a week to prepare, an hour to share. It is, of course, challenging to get that full context every week. So we appreciate everything you guys add to us. So please keep writing. We have one more here. This is Ian writing to yell at us from somewhere inside the UK, I'm guessing. Hello, guys. Okay, I get it. So you didn't care that much for Dusty Springfield, but I am astounded that you consider yourselves as music obsessives, yet haven't listened to Dusty in Memphis. That's like saying you've never heard the White Album or Marquee Moon or Thriller. By the way, Adam definitely has not heard at least one of those albums. Listen,
Correct.
let me just jump in right there and say that what you may not have realized, audience, is that because the Albinator has scanned all of our DNA, it kind of knows what we know and don't know. And the purpose of this podcast, in a way, is to introduce us to new music.
Yes.
Right? So listen, we don't control what the algorithm does, what the sacred scroll of the Albinator puts forth, but we did give it some inputs at some point many, many moons ago. So that might be part of what's happening.
It knows us. Yeah.
Yeah, it knows us. It knows us well.
Right.
And lastly, Ian, I got to tell you that I did listen to Dusty in Memphis. I think Adam did too. That actually led to our vote.
I did too. Yeah, right.
Sorry, getting defensive. No, we love this. Please complain about us. And he has one more complaint. And by the way, please cease referring to the United Kingdom of Great Britain as England. England is solely a part of UK. It would be similar to me referring to your country as California or Texas.
Well, we wouldn't mind if you just called it California, but I don't know about Texas.
Couple things. First of all, we all know that all Europeans think the U.S. is basically comprised of California and Texas, and maybe New York. So you're not kidding anyone right now. Second, you're right. Our UK geography and political histories are certainly not amazing. So I'll cop to that one. I still don't understand, by the way. You did not take the time to really explain it in this email, so I still don't understand. I'm left wanting. He ties it back in before he closes out. He says, this is particularly sensitive as Dusty Springfield would not necessarily have considered herself English as her parents were Irish.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, I still enjoyed the podcast, and I hope that your Albinator will eventually select Dusty in Memphis, and you will be more impressed by her contribution.
Nice. Great emails, as usual.
Great emails, great thoughts. We love learning.
It's like any relationship. We love you, and we're sorry.
Yes. Okay. And if you want to tell us what's on your mind, any little thing about any episode from the back catalog or more recently, add any of your thoughts or complain about us, just send it over to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Now only one thing remains, and that is to unearth the Albinator from its speed-induced coma and bring it out on stage with its cowboy hat and
Works mutton chops.
Bullet belt.
you know, actually the Albinator's up on stage in my view now, and it's got the microphone positioned weirdly above its face, so it's looking up and shouting into it. I don't know why that's happening. Okay, we're going to give it a spin. We're going to get our homework for next week. Without further ado, next week's album shall be... The band is Lynyrd Skynyrd. The album is called Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Oh, nice.
You know what's funny is that Lemmy kind of looks like his name could be Lynyrd Skynyrd.
That's a great point.
He does.
You know, if you look at the cover.
Well, I'm excited for this.
Yeah, Lynyrd Skynyrd. I think I had this album. My dad had this album growing up. And I always used to think that the album was called Lynyrd Skynyrd Smokes. Because the back, I couldn't tell which was the back and which was the front because the original album cover had a pack of cigarettes on it that I think with the songs on it, if I recall. And it turns out that it was the same album as this one called Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd, which is just obnoxious.
So I'm going to guess this is the first one from this group. I have never purposely put on Lynyrd Skynyrd in any context.
Oh, no, I've actively avoided them.
And let me just tell you, listeners, if this has Sweet Home Alabama on it, I'll be breaking the monitor over my leg and not attending. But no, excited to get into that. Listen to Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd for this week. Listen along with us. Join us next week where we recount the history of that band and that album and render our verdicts upon it. So we're going to close it out for this week. For everyone at 1001 Album Complaints, I've been Rob.
I'm Marty.
And I'm Adam.